Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for tonight's West Michigan Jazz Society Speaking of Jazz. So tonight we have a really special, well, I guess they're all special guests, right? We have a great guest tonight, a Hammond organist, the wonderful Jim Alfredson. Before we bring Jim on the screen here, I wanted to give you a little kind of a synopsis of what Jim's about and where he's from. Jim Alfredson, who currently lives in Lansing, Michigan, comes from a musical family. His father earned a living as a professional musician for many years and encouraged Jim's talents from a very young age. Some of Jim's earliest memories include pulling the drawbars on his father's Hammond B3 at the age of 4. Jim began writing his own songs at the age of 8 on a Yamaha organ. A score of synthesizers and multitrack machines followed until he came full circle at 16 and began pining for the sound of the Hammond organ once again. Jim has immersed himself in the study of the mighty Hammond B3 ever since and is dedicated to uncovering new directions within the deep tradition of the instrument. For 10 years, Jim served as the musical director and organist of a highly successful band called Root Doctor, producing 3 CDs for the band. Jim formed the jazz trio Organissimo in 2000, and which has had 5 critically acclaimed CDs and a DVD release. In 2009, Jim released a very special limited edition solo CD dedicated to the memory of his father. And also in 2009, Jim engineered and produced Greg Nagy's debut solo record, Walk That Fine Thin Line. Interestingly enough, Jim is one of those guys who is kind of like a quadruple threat here. He's got the Hammond organ thing going on. He's got considerable talent as an audio engineer. He is organized in the business element of our craft, our field. And of course, he is probably one of the, I think, more entrepreneurial musicians around here. So Jim is endorsed by Hammond Suzuki. He plays the Hammond SK2 with Organissimo, and for shows with others, he's using the SK1. And after years of lugging around an actual B3, which, if you know anything about an actual B3, it's really quite something. Jim has applauded the new Hammond organs not only as backsavers, which is very important, but extremely flexible instruments that retain the classic Hammond tone wheel sound. Jim is also endorsed by Casio, and he uses their wonderful line of Privia digital pianos, and he is also endorsed by Neo Instruments. All around, please give a warm welcome to Hammond Suzuki artist, Hammond B3 organist, synthesizer, and all-around good guy, Jim Alfredson.
All right.
Hey, Jim, what's going on, man?
Hey, man, that's a heck of an introduction.
Well, you know what? When you're here, you got to be here, and we got to make you feel welcome. So, Jim, I wanted to first talk to you about kind of, so Organissimo is celebrating a pretty important anniversary, right?
Yeah, that's true. We are in our 20th year together, and the 2 of the 3 founding members are still playing together. That's myself and Randy Marsh. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure all the listeners are familiar with.
Oh, I'm sure.
And we just did kind of a 20th anniversary blowout a couple weeks ago as part of the Jazz Alliance of Mid-Michigan. Mm-hmm. Helped put it on, and we got our original guitar player Joe Gloss to come back up and play with us, and we live streamed that. It was a lot of fun. We were actually making a record of that.
That's amazing.
Yeah, this should come out hopefully next month.
So now, the Jazz Alliance of Mid-Michigan, they recently honored you with, I believe, what was it, Musician of the Year?
Yeah, it's kind of their yearly honoree. I'm not sure the exact title of it, but yeah, it's something along those lines.
Yeah. So, how long have you been involved with the Jazz Alliance of Mid-Michigan?
Pretty much since the beginning. Greg Hill and Lois Muma are the kind of the founders of it, I guess you should say, and they've been doing some great work around the city. Of course, working with Michigan State and Rodney Whitaker, and,
yes,
and the other professors of jazz and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Very cool. So now Organissimo has been together for a long time, and I would say the longevity of that group is to me something to behold in this day and age, because sometimes it feels like, projects come and go and bands come and go. What have you learned from playing with pretty much one group? I mean, obviously you said the guitar player changed, but I mean, I'm fairly certain Randy's been involved from the top, right? So what have you learned from collaborating with a group like that for so long?
I mean, it's a cliche and you hear it all the time, but being in a band is definitely like being married. And I've been married for almost 20 years now. It's going on my going into 18 years now. So it's similar. I'd say being married is more fun than being in a band. Some people might disagree.
We'll make sure Allison sees the video of this.
But I guess the biggest thing I learned is that it takes work and it takes dedication, and of course you have to love each other and not get hung up on the small stuff.
Absolutely.
And just especially with jazz, I mean, it just comes down to the music. The music should be most important above all else. No egos, no rock star mentalities or any of that kind of stuff. We like to play music, and we like to play music together, and we have fun. So
very cool. So with regard to your recent projects, so COVID has been a really interesting time for musicians. And by interesting, I mean bad.
Yes.
So let's talk about Live from Jimmy's Basement.
Yeah.
Where did that idea come from, and how many streamed concerts have you guys done?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know how many exactly. We when all this happened, I had just gotten back from being on the road for a pretty extensive amount of time. Starting in early January, I went out with blues guitarist James Armstrong for a couple weeks, and then went out. I can't remember where the first trip was, but then we eventually wound up in California, and I went to the NAMM show with Hammond and demonstrated some of their products, and then straight from the NAMM show down to Florida, and got on a cruise ship and did a blues cruise with Thornetta Davis out of Detroit. And then I was home for like a week, and then we went back out west with James, and then went to Spain for 2 weeks, and then went back up into Canada. And so I was basically gone like from January to mid-March. And as soon as I got home, I guess it was early March, I got home on the 9th. And then like a week later, all this stuff happened. Everything shut down.
Yeah.
So the live streaming came about because I thought, well, we're not going to gig this summer. That's obvious with what's happening. And I know so many musicians that are not as fortunate as I am. I have a wife that is a realtor, and she makes decent money. And I mean, we're not, we're driving 12-year-old cars here, but we can at least keep the roof over our head. And I know so many musicians that don't have that luxury. So it was really created to help other people out and try to, keep people playing first and foremost, to bring the music to the people since they can't come to us, and then also hopefully allow people to make a little bit of money.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people, in terms of live stream concerts, I mean, people would go on Facebook Live all the time.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people find the technology rather vexing.
Yeah.
And so so I know you've been an audio engineer for a long time, but did you have like the video chops going as well before then, or was it something that you were kind of like, well, I might as well I might as well learn this, so I guess I'm just going to do it, and I might as well do it right. What was it with you?
I do have some background in video production and post production. In high school, I worked, on really ancient video gear by today's standards, doing high school meetings and stuff. Board meetings.
Yeah.
And then after college, I went to Ann Arbor and worked with a company that did a lot of stuff for the car industry. We did the Detroit Auto Show every year.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's where I got my chops in terms of like digital video, which is very different than the analog world. And then just before all this happened, I was helping a friend of mine who now lives in Belgium put together a video system to do streaming as well. So I had a little bit of experience with that. And I had the gear from him, thankfully. He actually kind of gave up on that idea and then gifted me the gear that we had purchased. And so I was lucky enough to have like the switcher and the cables and stuff that I needed to do it. So it just kind of was serendipitous that I had this stuff.
Yeah.
And that's why, I think not even a week after everything closed down, we were already starting to stream because I just happened to have the gear.
Yeah.
And, kind of figured out how to actually do it from there.
Yeah, and I mean, for those who are watching who might not be familiar, the Live from Jimmy's Basement video streaming concert series has hosted a host of artists, a multitude, like from all over the state, all over the country, and it's been a really great thing. And personally, for me, I mean, I love to like come out and make the hang and hear people play. And so part of the joy for me as a musician is just being able to hear people play. And, the next Live from Jimmy's Basement, if I could plug it, it's next week, right?
Yes, Tuesday.
And next week, Tuesday.
Yeah, we took a little break over the Christmas holidays, and plus, things in Michigan got a little crazier with
They did.
the COVID thing. So we wanted to be a little safer. And we're actually moving it's still going to be called Live from Jimmy's Basement, but we're moving it to a studio with a little bit more space.
Yeah, that's right.
So that we can have some social distancing between ourselves.
Great.
Yeah.
And so that'll feature Corey Allen, right?
Yep.
Alongside yourself and the fantastic Jeff Schaup.
Yep.
And so that's just going to be a great band. And I mean, I know you've worked with Corey quite a bit, and he's one of my favorite guitar players to play with. He's a great guy to boot. So for those of you who are tuning in and might not be familiar, next week Tuesday at what, 7?
7, yes.
At 7, you can catch a free concert. Some pretty amazing musicians, if I do say so myself, and you can go and hang, even though maybe you can't go and hang in person. So just kind of wanted to give the series a little plug. And then is that weekly on Tuesdays now again? Or?
Yep. We've started weekly, and then I want to start up the Organismo Sundays again, too.
Oh, yeah, that's right, yeah.
Unfortunately, Larry Bears had a little accident in his home, and he broke his foot.
Oh, no.
So he's not able to travel right now. So we're just kind of waiting for him to heal up, and then we can do that,
Yeah, that's great. So, talk to me about the Hammond organ. How
much time do you have?
Well, a while. So I love the Hammond organ, and I love the sound, and its roots, certainly in the Black Church, are undisputed. How did you get into the Hammond organ, and what made that instrument call out to you specifically? Like sometimes I think, the instrument chooses us more than we choose the instrument. Yeah. So how did somebody like yourself get started with the Hammond organ?
My father owned one when I was a kid. I barely remember it because I think he sold it when I was like 4, maybe. But I do remember sitting at it and pulling out the drawbars, which are, for people that don't know, the drawbars are like the stops on a pipe organ. They add harmonics to the sound. That's how you change the sound of the organ. And as a little kid, it's pretty fun to sit there and pull them out and hear what they do, how they change the sound. So he had one. He was a guitarist, but he loved organ. He had a bunch of Jimmy Smith records, Jimmy McGriff records, Jack McDuff, Groove Holmes, all that stuff. He just loved it. And I think that sound, because he owned one and because he played a little bit, it just kind of drilled itself into my brain at a young age. And when I was in my early teens, I was listening to a lot of his record collection, which was pretty eclectic. Had classical music in it and country and real down home Delta blues and R&B and pop music, and pretty much a sprinkling of everything. But I was pretty heavy into the progressive rock side of things: Pink Floyd, Genesis, Yes, ELP, all that stuff. And those groups all had one thing in common, which of course was a great keyboard player, number one, but also organ. They all had organ in them, and it was a Hammond organ. And so I kept asking my dad, I'm like, what is the sound? Because I didn't really remember, the B3. There's pictures of me sitting at it as a little kid, but I didn't really remember it. And he's like, oh, that's a Hammond. I said, well, I need a Hammond. I got to get the sound, man.
Yeah.
And that was music to his ears, because he loved that stuff so much. So he said, well, you've listened to, the rock side of things. Why don't you check out the jazz side of things? And he gave me this Jimmy Smith double LP. It was like the best of on Blue Note or something. And it just blew my mind way open. I had no idea what was happening, how three people were making this incredible sound, and especially how Jimmy Smith was doing all the bass lines. I was like, what is going on?
Yeah.
So that became an obsession, and he eventually found me a little M3, which is like a spin-it little version of the organ, and a Leslie. And then we eventually got a full-size console, and that's when I started playing pedals. And there's a wonderful organist and musician that's a local guy that not a lot of people know anymore, because he hasn't really played out that much lately, but his name is Doug Decker. And he is in Battle Creek now. I think he teaches recording down there, but he was my mentor when it came to figuring out how the whole thing worked. And he's an incredible organ player. I mean, just can play Larry Young Switties all day long. And so he was my first mentor when I was probably like 16, 17. And then it just turned out that he was in a band called Root Doctor. And he left to go to Japan and play some gigs over there for a year. So they hired me to fill in for him. And when he came back, they're like, oh, I think we're going to keep Jimmy. And that's where really I learned, how to play the thing for real. It was like trial by fire. I did have a trio with my dad on guitar and a drummer that was about my dad's age. We used to play around the cafes and stuff, and I kind of learned left-hand bass there. But when it came to actually understanding how the organ worked and like getting into it, it was really Root Doctor that taught me that, and Doug Decker.
Wow, that's such a terrific origin story for your your career, your path, your passion here.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you really like pop and rock and prog and all these different styles of music. What draws you to this eclecticism? Because I know a lot of people who are kind of like, all right, I like one thing, and that one thing is going to be the thing that I play. But I've never experienced that in playing with you or listening to you. So what drives that kind of seemingly universal love of music that way?
I think it's just curiosity. Music is endless, and there's always so much more to learn about it. Lately I've been really into classical, especially symphonic classical, like getting into the different composers like Sibelius and Saison and Mahler and stuff like that. It's stuff I've really never listened to that deeply before, but now for some reason it's just hitting me. So I've been listening to a lot of that, and part of me, if I have one regret, it's that I didn't study classical organ. I kind of wish I had, because I've been getting into the French school of classical organists as well for the last couple of years. And I like to hear what's happening too in the modern sense. I don't listen to a lot of modern pop, but I do listen to the stuff my daughters listen to. I have young daughters, and I'll listen to it with them, and some of it's really good and some of it's not, but that's music. That's true of all genres. I am kind of stuck in the 70s when it comes to rock, I think. But
it's not a bad place to be.
It's not a bad place to be, I think it really came again out of my dad's record collection, because he was so eclectic when it came to his taste that he just had a little bit of everything. And to me, music has never really been about boundaries. And even when it comes to organismo, I mean, if you listen to our first 3 records, there's a lot of varied inspirations contained within those tracks. There's progressive rock. There's a little bit of finger picking because Joe was a bluegrass guy before he became a jazz guy. And Randy, of course, has played pretty much everything over the years.
Absolutely.
A big Zappa head, and
without a doubt.
Yeah, so and big fusion heads, so there's a little bit of everything in there, and to me, that's what keeps it interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of Randy and your jazz jam, Jazz Alliance of Mid-Michigan. There we go.
Yeah.
Speaking of this honor, so this record that you're doing, when does that release?
We're hoping next month in February, probably late February.
February, great.
Yeah.
So I see this link on your website. I hope it's cool that I post the pre-order link in here so people can support you. So here's this PayPal link, everybody, and we can support Jim and support this record. Should be pretty hip. Go in and order it. You can pre-order the record. Should be really cool.
Yeah, so I should mention that it's going to be probably a combination of, when we played with Joe, we got Joe back up, our original guitar player, and we played a lot of the classic tunes with him from the first 3 records. But we also played a whole set with Larry, our current guitar player, and it's all new stuff. So it's going to be a combination of both. So there's going to be tunes that you haven't heard before on there, and well, unless you watch the live stream, of course, but tunes that have not been, officially released, I should say. Yeah. And then some oldies but goodies. And then we did a big jam at the end with Joe and Larry on both playing guitars, so that was fun too.
Very nice, very nice. That's really cool. So so you do Organismo, you do your solo organ thing, you play in the trio with Jeff. What other projects do you have going on? Like what other things?
I've got this project behind me that I just finished. That's not musical though. We just finished our I'm in our newly remodeled bedroom because it looks so nice. You can kind of see the closet bag behind me.
It looks great.
I did all the woodworking. Yeah, I'm proud of that. But musically, I play with Thornetta Davis, usually when she's doing international stuff. And then James Armstrong, as I mentioned, he's a great blues guitar player that lives outside of Chicago. I play with Echoes of Pink Floyd, which is a Pink Floyd cover band. That's a lot of fun. It gives me a chance to use my synthesizers. And let's see, Laura Rain and the Caesars, which are like a old school R&B like funk outfit. They play a really interesting mixture of blues and classic R&B, but it's all original stuff. It's real funky and fun. I get to play synths sometimes in there too. And I toured with Janet and Magnus for about 4 years, and during this pandemic we've kind of reconnected and done some live streams together, where essentially she got the old band back together that we had back then, the drummer, the guitar player, the bassist, myself, and we tracked these tunes separately, and then I pieced it all together, and then we broadcast it over Facebook. And it was a lot of fun to play those old tunes again with them, and some new tunes too that I hadn't played. And we're doing a third one coming up. I'm waiting to get the last of the parts together so I can piece it all together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you play in that band? Do you play synths or do you play Hammond?
In Janova's band, I play mostly piano and Hammond.
Mostly piano. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you play Hammond and you play with a bass player, I've heard people who play Hammond some of them kind of are like, oh man, there's a bass player. Oh no, like what is going on?
Yeah.
So what's your approach to when you play with a bass player?
If it's jazz, then it's a little more difficult for me because the way I learned jazz was as a left-hand bass player on the organ or pedals, and so they kind of keep me grounded. Like my left hand kind of tells me where I am in terms of the changes. So it's a little more difficult, but I really do love organists like Shirley Scott, who played with a bass player a lot. Oh, yeah. And so I just kind of approach it like she approached it. So big block chords and more pianistic. But when it comes to like blues and stuff like that, I have no problem playing with a bass player. It's actually a lot of fun because I can be more rhythmic.
Okay.
And to kind of separate myself. When I played with Root Doctor, I noticed that we were a 5-piece: guitar, bass, drums, keys, and a lead singer. And whenever the guitar player would solo, all of a sudden the rhythm would drop out because there's no rhythm guitar player, And so I would treat the organ or the piano like the rhythm guitar player and take over what he was playing before, instead of just playing pads, like whole notes or something.
Yeah.
And so I kind of do that same thing if the music calls for it with other blues artists as well. I play very rhythmically, almost like another rhythm guitar player or something.
That's really cool to hear your different approaches to these different and kind of disparate styles of music. Very, to me as a saxophone player, it's very fascinating to hear how other musicians blend into different genres.
Yeah. I used to play saxophone.
Right on.
I played alto.
Oh, very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
So we got Kevin up in here, and he says Jim is a swinging cat. Love playing with him.
The feeling is mutual.
Well, and I have to second Kevin's comment there. It's always a good time. So you and Ivan Akansima and Jeff Schaup recently released a holiday record.
Yeah.
Yeah, talk to me about that.
It was unfortunately kind of a last minute thing. I mean, Ivan had the idea in early November, and we did it about as quickly as we could. It kind of, I kind of dropped the ball on getting the mix out. I wanted to get it out sooner than we did, but we kind of released it like right before Christmas Eve, essentially.
I think that's good timing.
Yeah, I mean, it worked out. I would have liked to have done a physical release, but I actually don't know if that's even viable these days. The music industry is so weird right now.
It is.
But it was a lot of fun. I would like to actually do it again maybe next year and do an actual release, but come up with some other arrangements. Because really what we did was we just got together in my studio, and he brought a list of tunes he wanted to do, and then we just kind of all collectively said, okay, why don't we try this feel or this idea? And it came together really quickly. I think we did the whole thing in like 3 hours. It was like 8 tunes that we'd never played together before, and just ran them down.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, and it just goes to show you like this music is kind of serendipitous in a way, and when you have 3 musicians such as yourselves, it's meant to be spontaneous. It's meant to be free. It's meant to be, so much of it is meant to be impactful in that way. And so that's such a cool thing.
And his attitude was really cool too. Ivan's attitude was just like, okay, we'll try it.
It is.
We'll try it. And, there's a couple little mistakes here and there, but are they really mistakes, or are they just what happened in the moment,
Right. Well, and I mean, to me, that's what makes the music real.
Yeah.
You hear Sonny Rollins play a solo, and it's the most killing thing. He goes and fracks a note or whatever.
Right.
And Cannon too,
Yeah.
Cannonball will frack a note every once in a while, but it's like the hippest, most soulful and swinging thing.
Yeah.
And so you're like, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
Because it's real.
Yeah. If it's swinging, then what the heck?
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of the process of recording, now a lot of people know you as an organist, certainly, and as a musician, but also you have this really cool side of you, which is the audio engineer side. And to me, that's really fascinating, because I was just starting to get into a little bit of that during the shutdown in March. And I was just like, this is like, there's a very deep well to go down. And like, this is really intense. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions regarding this.
Okay.
First one is, how did you get started in that, and when? Because to me, when we did the Live from Jimmy's Basement with my group, you read like you were like, okay, whatever, this is a thing I've done for my whole career or whatever. So like,
kind of.
Yeah. Like, so how did you get started with it?
Same thing. I had to go back to my father again. I think just him being a musician and also being kind of a autodidact like myself, he just kind of taught himself to do a bunch of different things like I do. And he got into recording very early because he wrote so many tunes. He actually wrote like 1,200 songs, that most of which nobody's ever heard outside the family. And he wanted to catalog them, and he didn't read or write music, so he's like, well, I got to record them. So he bought himself a little recording setup, and this, I'm talking like early 80s, so what you could get at that time was not spectacular by any means. I mean, you can make better recordings on your iPhone than he ever could, but he had like a little 4-track cassette recorder and a couple cheap mics, and that was about it. And he spent late nights when everybody was asleep recording his tunes every night until he got them all done, just so they'd be cataloged. Because we lived in a very tiny house. We had seven kids and the 2 parents, so 9 people altogether. 2-bedroom house. So he just had to wait till everybody was sleeping, and he would go in the corner of the living room and turn on his gear and just sing these songs and play them very softly into the recorder so he could get them down. And then once he did that, he kind of got tired of the guitar and got into synthesizers, so he bought a DX7. This is probably like 88, 89, somewhere around there. And that's when I got interested in it, because we have this 4-track machine and the synthesizer, and you could create all these weird sounds with this thing, so you can layer them together on the 4-track machine. And then when I got into high school, I started to acquire a little bit better gear. And then when I got to college is when I really got crazy, and I went down to the bank. Opened myself up a bank account and got a credit card and bought a bunch of recording gear instead of books. And started recording concerts around MSU and stuff for people, and befriended Glenn Brown, who's probably the best recording engineer I've ever met, and I've met recording engineers all over the world. He's right there in East Lansing, and we became great friends, and he's been kind of my mentor when it comes to learning this stuff, because he's a freaking genius when it comes to that stuff. And ever since then, I've just been slowly acquiring the gear that I need to make the music I want to make. And then at this point, what you can buy these days for very little money is just incredible. You can have a studio that's 1,000 times better than anything they had during the Motown days in Detroit for a couple $100. It's incredible. But it is definitely a rabbit hole when it comes to learning the basics. It's like anything else. I mean, it's like woodworking, or
without a doubt.
Yeah, you just have to learn basics. And for me, the best way that I learn is from having a mentor, somebody to show me the ropes, and then off I go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's insane. So with your kind of penchant for recording stuff, and you said that in this day and age we can buy a lot of stuff that's quite good. So what is your advice to people who are looking to get started? Say they're looking to do just like your dad did and document some of their music. What's your advice to those people who just kind of want to get into it a little bit?
The biggest thing that people tend to ignore are the acoustics. I'm in a room right now that's basically just a big square box with a it's my bedroom, so it has a bed in it, so it's probably not too live in here. But the biggest thing is just to assess your room and spend some money and time on acoustic treatments and not necessarily on gear, because you can get, for $500 you can get a really great computer interface and a couple great microphones and basically record anything you want. But if you're recording it in a room that doesn't sound very good, or that has a lot of echo, or that has a lot of reverberation, it's not going to sound that good. So that was the hardest lesson for me, because I invested all this money when we moved into this house 17 years ago. I had invested all this money into gear, and I had some good mics, and I kept getting really bad drum sounds in my little studio, and I couldn't figure it out. And finally one day Glenn came over and he's like, "Oh, well, this is the problem. Your room sounds like a box, and thus your drums are going to sound boxy."
Yeah.
And this is what you need. This is what you need to do. Put a bass trap in that corner and put this over here, and that was even cheaper than the gear to actually treat the acoustics of the room. So that's what I always tell people, when they just get started. And this is like, fix the room first, And then once you get the room fixed, then you can start reading about microphone placement and technique and all that stuff, because that's the easy stuff.
Yeah, so Kevin actually has a question here. So he says, so is natural reverb bad then?
It depends. I find that if you're in a small room, then you're going to get like a small reverb sound, which tends to be boxy. And there's a thing called comb filtering. It's where frequencies interfere with each other, and you get these weird problems with the sound that it makes it sound nasal, or it makes it sound thin, or maybe even too boomy or whatever, and you have to apply all this processing to get rid of it. Whereas if you have a good sounding room, you can use less processing, get a more pure sound, and it just sounds better, and it's easier to mix, and you're not pulling your hair out. So for example, with drums in my little studio, which has only 7-foot tall ceilings, which is very, very short for a studio, I don't want to hear the room at all. I want the room to disappear. I want it to sound like the drums are in a field somewhere out in the middle of nowhere, and you can't hear any echo or any reverb or anything. So to do that, you just have to make the room dead, and then you can add reverb later in the mixing process, or that tends to work for me. Now, if you have a big room, the nice thing about having a big room is that you can have more people in the room, more players playing together, and not get bleed problems between microphones. Or there'll still be bleed, but the bleed will be nice bleed, and it won't sound bad. If you have a bunch of people in a small room playing together, the bleed's going to be terrible, because you're going to get way too much hi-hat and guitar mic and that kind of stuff. So in general, I would say for most home recordists that are recording in the home where the rooms are only 10 or 12 feet by 12 feet, that yes, natural reverberation is bad.
Yeah, great answer to that question. I think there are so many intricacies, but a lot of people, particularly I don't know why it is, but artists who are on the younger side of things are like, all right, microphones, gear, let's bring it on. Let's
that's how I was.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what you want to do first, and you think that's going to solve the problem. Especially when it comes to microphones, you're like, well, I have this cheap microphone, and that must be the problem. Well, it might not be the problem, because microphones have gotten so much better in the last 20 years. What you can get for a couple $100 used to be like $5,000 back in the 70s or 80s, so.
Yeah. Very cool. So who are some of your musical inspirations? Obviously, you mentioned your father.
Yep.
But you also mentioned Jimmy Smith.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody with tastes that are as eclectic as yours, you got to be listening to people like all the way out the door. You know what I'm saying? Who are some of your musical inspirations?
Probably the biggest one that people that know me well probably realize is Tony Banks from Genesis. And I'm not talking like the 80s Genesis that was real cheesy, although I love that stuff too for its own reasons. But I'm talking like the real experimental progressive stuff they did in the 70s. And the thing I love about Tony Banks is he's the musician's keyboard player. Like, he's not flashy like Emerson was, sticking knives in the organ and lighting stuff on fire. Didn't wear capes like Rick Wakeman. He didn't surround himself with unnecessary gear on stage just because it looked cool. He was all about the music. And his influences in terms of composition are very romantic in nature. Like, he likes the romantic composers. And he likes the British composers, like Ray Vaughan Williams and Elgar and people like that. And you can hear that in his compositions. And for me, having listened to that stuff since I was a little kid, when I finally got experienced enough to start taking it apart and learning what he was doing, I was just blown away by his sense of melody, his harmonic sense, the intricacy of the chords and how they all fit together. I think he's a genius when it comes to composing. And he's actually making classical music now. He's composing. He's got a couple CDs out that he recorded with the London Philharmonic of his compositions. He's not playing on them. He's just composing now. So he's a huge inspiration, and he's inspired me to really dig deep into classical music for more inspiration and more ideas.
That's cool.
Yeah. Well,
I'd like to kind of spend our last few minutes together opening it up for questions.
Okay.
So if anybody has any questions for Jim, obviously you can see here he's been, he doesn't bite. He's been, pretty cool about answering my questions. So I'm sure he'll answer yours as well. So any questions for our guest here? While we're waiting, I do just want to say that Jazz Talks, or Speaking of Jazz, is provided free of charge by the West Michigan Jazz Society. Feel free, to donate if you can to support our mission, West Michigan Jazz Society. Oh, here we go.
Say a word about Charles Earlin. I got in trouble talking about Charles Earlin one time. This is actually a funny story. Kevin will appreciate this. We were playing the Rochester Jazz Festival up in New York, and we were playing right before Fathead Newman, and we'd opened for Fathead a couple times when he came to Michigan, and he's one of my favorite tenor players of all time. Him and Stanley Turrentine are like my that's every time I listen to those guys I just get happy. So we were playing right before him, and he had this amazing organ player with him. I think Kevin probably even knows him. His name's Radam Schwartz, and he's a total nutball. I love the guy. And I think it was Radam that maybe it wasn't even Radam. It might have been somebody else. I might be misremembering. But I just remember the promoter of the festival said, "Man, there's somebody here that wants to talk to you, and he's pretty angry at you." I said, "Okay." and I don't think, now that I think of it, I don't think it was Radam. But Radam did actually play after us with David Fathead Newman, and he broke keys on the B3. And I remember thinking, boy, I'm glad I played before him, because I didn't have to play the broken B3. But anyways, this guy comes up and comes backstage, and he's like, "Hey, man, you're the Jim Alfredson that runs the Organismo Forum, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Man, that stuff you were saying about Charles Earlin, man, that's not right, man. You shouldn't talk like that." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "I've never dissed Charles Earlin." He goes, "No, you wrote that he was very simplistic." I said, "Well, he was. I mean, his harmonic sense and his idea, like he repeats the same riff over and over again. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that's how he plays. There's nothing wrong with it." And the guy's like, "Well, you were saying it was a negative thing." I'm like, "No, not at all. That's not what I'm saying. He grooves his ass off. The mighty burner. You can't get any better than that. It's just, but if you want to learn how to play organ, that's a good place to start, because he's fairly simplistic. His approach, his bass lines, everything he's playing is very rudimentary. Again, that's not a knock on the guy. It's just the way it is." And I was trying to explain myself to the guy, and he was mad. He kept getting madder and madder. He's like, "Well, who are you to think you can criticize him?" I'm like, "I'm not criticizing him, man. I'm just talking." He didn't get it. He was upset.
Yeah. It's hilarious to me that people mistake complex for good.
Right. That's not what
complex
I'm saying
and good are not the same thing. No. And so to me, like when I hear somebody like, Stanley Turrentine, it's simple tenor playing, but it's beautiful. It's incredible. And in and of itself, that makes it valid. But if simple is bad, so many of us are going to be out of jobs really quickly.
We're in trouble if that's the case.
Yeah, we are.
That's one thing that it was one of the nicest compliments I ever got from my time in Root Doctor is, and I think it was my friend Kevin Anker that said it, or maybe we were talking about this. He's a great keyboard player down in Indianapolis, plays with the Fabulous Thunderbirds and Tad Robinson and stuff. And he said, "Man, I like how you play because you don't put too much jazz into the blues like some of these guys."
Yeah.
I said, "Yeah, man, you can't. You can, but sometimes it works, but a lot of times it doesn't." Yeah, if you're playing behind a singer and it's a real blues singer, they don't want to hear that.
No,
they want to hear the blues, man. They don't want to hear some augmented ninth chord back there.
Not even remotely.
You think you're being hip, but really you're just messing up the soul of it,
Yeah. All right. So Kevin's in here being an instigator. Yeah, he's up in here and he's saying, "All right, say a word about Jack McDuff."
I only got to meet McDuff once, and it was towards the end of his life. Unfortunately, it was after he had his stroke. And the amazing thing about him is even after the stroke, he was still playing so well, and it was really fun to watch him because his left hand and his bass lines on his feet were rock solid. I mean, just grooving like nobody's business. But every now and then he'd play a line with his right, and he'd just kind of forget where he was and stop for a second. The bass line wouldn't stop, but he'd just kind of like stop in the middle of a phrase and then pick it right back up again. It was so interesting to see. But one of my favorite records of all time that my dad hit me to was the live McDuff record. And it's not, you listen to it, it's obviously not live. They like put pre-recorded clapping and it's like the same tape loop over and over again. But the playing on that record is so nasty. And McDuff, of course, was a huge inspiration for Keith Emerson. And I talked to Keith one time. I got to meet him at the NAMM show. The only time I've ever been starstruck in my life was standing next to Keith Emerson. I was like, oh my God. But he was the nicest guy ever. And I said, I brought up two things to him. One was he has this song on the Works album. I'm trying to think of the name of it. It's escaping me right now. But the intro to the song is exactly like a song by John Patton off one of Patton's records. And I asked him, I'm like, man, did you rip that off of John Patton? And he just smiled at me. He's like, you caught me. And the other thing I asked him, I told him, I said, I read this interview with you one time when you were saying that your Hammond tone on those ELP records, you were trying to emulate McDuff. And he goes, yeah, I loved his sound, just the sound of his organ. I said, that the reason it sounds like that is because he's playing bass. And he's like, yeah, he goes, I figured that out eventually. He's like, so he would hold down a bass note, even if they filtered it out on the record, like just got rid of it through EQ, but he'd hold that bass note so that the amp would overdrive even more and get him that really nasty, grungy sound that McDuff used to get. Because the only way you can do it on an old Leslie like that is to have the bass going as well. Because it's basically, it's sagging the amp. Guitar players know about that, rectifier sag in the tubes. It's the amp is just struggling to get by when you're putting that much frequency through it, and that's where you get that sound from.
That's really cool to hear, and to me, like, again, as a saxophone player, that's super fascinating. As a saxophone player, I'll qualify that further. As a saxophone player who really, really loves Hammond organ.
Yeah.
All right, so I think that's about all the time we have, but I want to thank you so much, Jim, for being here with us and for coming on the program here. I want to close out with this comment from Ivan Akansima. And Ivan says, Jim is among the most honorable musicians I've ever met.
Oh.
And I just have to say that I agree wholeheartedly. And I wish you all the best with your record release upcoming here.
Thank you.
In February. Can't wait to hear it. And thanks, everybody, for joining us. And on behalf of the West Michigan Jazz Society, this has been Speaking of Jazz with WMJS. Thanks, and have a great night.